Picture this. The most beloved god in all of Norse mythology is about to die. Not in some epic battle against giants or monsters. Not saving the world from destruction. He's going to be killed by a blind god throwing what looks like a harmless plant. And the worst part, his own mother made it possible. This is the story of Baldur, the Norse god whose death changed everything. It's a tale of family drama, divine politics, and one very bitter trickster who just couldn't let sleeping gods lie. Meet Baldur the Beautiful. If the Norse gods had a popularity contest, he'd win by a landslide. This guy was basically the golden boy of Asgard, literally. His skin glowed with an inner light. His hair shimmered like spun gold. Even his eyelashes were supposedly bright enough to illuminate dark rooms. Baldur wasn't just pretty, though. He was wise, fair, and had a speaking voice so pleasant that his words were considered final in any dispute. Think of him as the divine equivalent of that one friend everyone loves, the one who somehow makes everyone feel better just by being around. His hall was called Breidablik, which means broad gleaming. The name fits perfectly. Nothing impure could enter this shining palace. It was basically the VIP section of heaven, and Baldur was its permanent resident. Baldur's parents were Odin and Frigg, the king and queen of the gods. And boy, did they dote on this kid. Odin, the All-Father, was known for his wisdom and strategic mind. Frigg controlled marriage, motherhood, and domestic life. Together, they created what seemed like the perfect son. But here's where it gets interesting. The Norse gods weren't exactly known for their stable family relationships. Looking at you, Zeus. Yet somehow, Baldur managed to be universally loved. His brother Thor was the muscle. His half-brother Loki was the troublemaker. But Baldur, he was the heart. Frigg especially adored her golden son. Maternal love in Norse mythology could move mountains, or in this case, it could make every object in existence swear an oath. We'll get to that mind-blowing part soon. What made Baldur so special? Everything, apparently. He was handsome, wise, gentle, and fair. The other gods would literally stop their conversations just to watch him walk by. His very presence brought peace to conflicts and joy to gatherings. But here's the thing about being perfect in Norse mythology. It makes you a target. The cosmos has a way of balancing things out. Light creates shadows, good attracts evil, and being universally loved, well, that's just asking for trouble. Baldur had one brother worth mentioning here, Höðr. Unlike his radiant sibling, Höðr was born blind. He couldn't see Baldur's legendary beauty, but he could feel his brother's goodness. The two were actually quite close, which makes what happens later even more tragic. The other gods treated Baldur like royalty among royalty. When he spoke, they listened. When he laughed, they smiled. When he worried, they panicked. This level of devotion would soon prove both blessing and curse. Then came the nightmares. Baldur started having dreams, dark, disturbing visions of his own death. In Norse culture, dreams weren't just random brain activity during sleep. They were messages from the cosmos, glimpses of fate itself. Night after night, Baldur would wake up in cold sweats. The details were always fuzzy, but the outcome was crystal clear. He was going to die. Not in some distant future either. Soon. These weren't your typical, forgot to study for the test, anxiety dreams. These were prophetic visions that shook the very foundations of Asgard. When the most beloved god starts having death dreams, everyone pays attention. Frigg was beside herself. Imagine your perfect, wonderful child coming to you with nightmares about dying. Now imagine you're a goddess with actual power to do something about it. Frigg wasn't about to sit around and let fate take its course. But wait, there's something you need to know about Norse fate. They called it word, and it was considered absolutely unavoidable. Even the gods couldn't escape their destiny. So when Baldur started having death dreams, it wasn't just scary, it was practically a divine death sentence. This is where Frigg proved that maternal love knows no bounds, even cosmic ones. She decided to do something unprecedented, cheat fate itself. Her plan was ambitious, crazy, and just desperate enough to work. Frigg would travel throughout all the 9 realms. She would visit every single thing in existence, every plant, animal, mineral, element, disease, and force of nature, and she would make each one swear a sacred oath never to harm her beloved son. Think about the scope of this mission. We're talking about everything from mighty dragons to tiny pebbles. Fire had to promise not to burn him. Water couldn't drown him. Diseases had to agree not to infect him. Even abstract concepts like old age had to swear they'd leave Baldur alone. The other gods thought she'd lost her mind. You can't just go around making the entire universe promise to protect one person. But Frigg was determined. She'd rather exhaust herself trying than lose her son to some cosmic game of fate. And here's the incredible part. It actually worked. One by one, everything in existence gave their word. The sun promised its rays wouldn't blind him. Wolves swore their teeth wouldn't pierce his skin. Even poison ivy agreed to leave him be. Talk about dedication to customer service. Soon, Baldur became literally invulnerable. Nothing could hurt him. Nothing at all. Frigg had successfully mother-henned her way to defeating fate itself, or so she thought. But as we'll discover, even the most careful mother can overlook the smallest details. And in Norse mythology, it's always the smallest details that bring down the mightiest gods. Frigg's mission was a success beyond anyone's wildest dreams. She had literally convinced the entire universe to protect her son. Fire, ice, metals, stones, trees, beasts, birds, poisons, and diseases. Everything had given their sacred word. The transformation was immediate and spectacular. Baldur walked through Asgard like he owned the place, which in a way he now did. Swords bounced off his skin like rubber toys. Arrows turned to flower petals mid-flight. Even accidentally stubbing his toe became physically impossible. The other gods were amazed. Here was divine invulnerability made manifest. Baldur had become the first truly immortal being in Norse mythology. Not even Odin himself could claim such protection. But you know what they say about too much of a good thing. The gods, being gods, decided to have some fun with their new indestructible friend. And that's where things started to get interesting and dangerous. What do you do when you discover your friend is completely invulnerable? If you're a Norse god, you throw things at him. The gods turned Baldur's invincibility into the ultimate party game. They'd gather in the Great Hall, place Baldur in the center, and take turns hurling weapons at him. Swords would bounce off harmlessly. Spears would curve away at the last second. Thor once threw his mighty hammer Mjolnir directly at Baldur's head. It ricocheted and embedded itself in a nearby pillar instead. The gods would cheer and laugh as each impossible deflection proved Frigg's magic held strong. This became the hottest entertainment in Asgard. Gods would line up for their turn to test Baldur's protection. They tried everything. Fire, ice, boulders, lightning bolts. Nothing worked. Baldur would stand there smiling while the forces of nature bent themselves into pretzels to avoid harming him. Even Baldur seemed to enjoy it. For the first time in his life, he could be completely carefree. No need to worry about accidents or injuries. He was living proof that a mother's love could literally move mountains, or in this case, deflect them. But there was one god who wasn't laughing along with the crowd. Loki the trickster watched these games with growing irritation. While everyone else celebrated Baldur's invulnerability, Loki saw it as a challenge to his reputation as the smartest god in Asgard. Here's the thing about Loki. He couldn't stand seeing anyone get something he didn't have. Baldur's universal protection irked him like a splinter under his fingernail. There had to be a loophole. There always was. So Loki did what he did best. He investigated, but he was smart about it. Instead of asking direct questions that might raise suspicion, he decided on a more subtle approach. He would go straight to the source, Frigg herself. Loki was a master of disguise and deception. He transformed himself into an old woman, bent, harmless, and curious. In this form, he approached Frigg while she was spinning in her hall. The conversation that followed would change everything. "My lady," the disguised Loki said in a creaky old voice, "I've heard such amazing stories about your son. Is it really true that nothing in all the 9 realms can harm him?" Frigg beamed with maternal pride. Oh yes, dear woman. I made everything swear an oath to never hurt my precious Baldr. Fire, water, iron, stone. Absolutely everything gave me their word. She paused, then added almost casually, well, everything except that little mistletoe plant growing west of Valhalla. And there it was, the fatal slip of the tongue that would doom the most beloved god in Norse mythology. Why did Frigg skip the mistletoe? The answer reveals both her thoroughness and her tragic oversight. She had indeed traveled to every corner of existence, making everything swear its oath. But when she came across a tiny mistletoe plant growing on an oak tree, she dismissed it as too young and insignificant to bother with. What harm could such a small, soft thing possibly do, she had thought. The mistletoe was barely more than a sprout. It had no thorns, no poison, no sharp edges. It seemed as threatening as a blade of grass, which is to say, not at all. This decision made perfect sense at the time. Frigg had already secured oaths from massive dragons, deadly diseases, and the forces of nature themselves. Why waste time on a plant so harmless that people used it for decoration during winter festivals? But Loki saw what Frigg had missed. In Norse magic, it wasn't the size or apparent threat level that mattered. It was the completeness of the protection. One tiny gap in the armor, and the whole spell became vulnerable. The disguised trickster thanked Frigg for her time and hobbled away, his mind already spinning with possibilities. He had found his loophole. Now he just needed to figure out how to exploit it. Loki wasted no time. He traveled west of Valhalla and found the exact mistletoe plant Frigg had mentioned. It was indeed small and seemingly harmless. Just a few green shoots with tiny white berries clinging to an ancient oak. But in Loki's hands, this innocent plant would become the deadliest weapon in all the 9 realms. He carefully broke off a branch, studying its properties. Soft, flexible, unremarkable. Perfect for his purposes. Now came the tricky part. Loki couldn't just walk up and throw mistletoe at Baldur himself. That would be too obvious, and besides, the other gods would never let him participate in their games. They didn't trust him, and for good reason. He needed a proxy, someone who could deliver the fatal blow without suspicion, someone who had legitimate reason to be at the throwing games, but might need a little assistance with their aim. That's when Loki's eyes fell on Höðr, Baldur's blind brother. Here was the perfect unwitting weapon. Höðr was everything his brother wasn't. Where Baldur shone with inner light, Höðr lived in permanent darkness. Where Baldur was the center of attention, Höðr often stood quietly on the sidelines. But despite these differences, the brothers genuinely loved each other. The hardest part for Höðr wasn't his blindness itself. It was watching the other gods enjoy their games with Baldur while he could only listen. He wanted to participate, to show his brother the same playful affection the others did. But how could a blind god join in a throwing contest? This is exactly what Loki was counting on. He approached Höðr during one of the throwing games when the blind god was standing alone, listening wistfully to the laughter and cheers. "Why aren't you joining in the fun, Höðr?" Loki asked with false concern. "Don't you want to honor your brother like the others?" Höðr's face fell. "You know why, Loki? I can't see where to aim. I'd probably miss him entirely and embarrass myself." The longing in his voice was heartbreaking. "That's easily fixed," Loki said smoothly. "I'll guide your hand, and I have the perfect thing for you to throw. Something light and harmless that won't hurt even if your aim is off." He pressed the mistletoe branch into Höðr's palm. To the blind god, it felt exactly as Frigg had described it. Soft, small, and completely harmless. What could possibly go wrong? The scene was set with devastating precision. The gods had gathered for another round of their favorite game. Baldur stood in the center of the hall, radiant and smiling, ready to demonstrate his invulnerability once again. Thor had just finished his turn, hurling a massive boulder that had curved away from Baldur at the last second. The gods cheered and called for the next participant. That's when Loki stepped forward with Höðr beside him. "Höðr would like to take a turn," Loki announced. The hall fell silent. Everyone knew about Höðr's blindness, and they weren't sure how this would work. Baldur's face lit up with genuine joy. Of course, brother. I'd be honored. He had always felt bad that Höðr couldn't participate in the games. This seemed like a perfect solution. Loki positioned Höðr carefully, adjusting his stance and grip. Just throw it straight ahead, he whispered. I'll make sure your aim is true. The mistletoe branch felt almost weightless in Höðr's hand. The other gods watched with interest. This would be a touching moment of brotherly bonding. Höðr would finally get to participate. Baldr would demonstrate his protection once more, and everyone would have a good laugh about how even mistletoe couldn't harm the golden god. None of them had any idea they were about to witness the beginning of the end of the world. But here's what makes this moment even more chilling. Loki had planned for every contingency except one. He had found the loophole in Frigg's protection. He had crafted the perfect weapon. He had chosen the ideal unwitting assassin. But he hadn't considered what would happen after Baldr actually died. Because in Norse mythology, some deaths are just the beginning of much bigger problems. Höðr drew back his arm, the mistletoe branch light as a feather in his grip. The hall was completely silent except for the crackling of torches. Every god held their breath, waiting to see this touching moment of brotherly participation. Now, Loki whispered. Höðr threw the mistletoe with all his strength. It sailed through the air, looking like nothing more than a harmless twig. But the moment it touched Baldr's chest, everything changed. The branch pierced through his skin like it was made of paper. Baldr's eyes went wide with shock. He looked down at the tiny piece of mistletoe protruding from his heart, unable to believe what he was seeing. Then he collapsed. The most beloved god in all of Norse mythology was dead, killed by the one thing in existence that hadn't promised to protect him. The silence that followed was deafening. What happened next was unlike anything the gods had ever experienced. These were beings who had fought giants, wrestled with monsters, and faced down the forces of chaos itself. But Baldr's death broke them completely. Höðr stood frozen, still not understanding what had happened. The mistletoe had felt so harmless in his hands. How could something so small have done what dragons and lightning bolts could not? The other gods rushed to Baldr's side, but it was too late. His golden light was already fading. His perfect features grew pale and still. The god who had brought joy to every gathering would never laugh again. Frigg's scream when she arrived echoed through all 9 realms. This was the sound of a mother's heart breaking, raw, primal, and absolutely devastating. She had moved heaven and earth to protect her son, only to watch him die from her one oversight. Odin stood over his son's body, his face a mask of grief and rage. The All-Father who supposedly knew everything had been blindsided by fate itself. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, perched silently on his shoulders, for once having no news to report that could make things worse. But Frigg wasn't ready to accept defeat. She had cheated fate once before. Maybe, just maybe, she could do it again. Through her tears, Frigg made a desperate announcement. I will give anything at all, to whoever will ride to Hell's realm and bring my son back. The goddess of death might be willing to make a deal. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. The journey to Hell's realm was no casual trip. It meant riding through the land of the dead, facing creatures that would terrify even gods, and confronting Hel herself, the half-living, half-corpse goddess who ruled over those who died of sickness or old age. Most of the gods looked away. This was a suicide mission with almost no chance of success, but one figure stepped forward, Hermóðr, another of Baldur's brothers. I'll go, he said simply. Hermóðr wasn't the strongest god or the wisest, but he was brave and loyal. If there was even the slightest chance of bringing Baldr back, he would take it. Odin immediately offered his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, the fastest steed in all the realms. If anyone could make this impossible journey, it would be Sleipnir and his fearless rider. The ride to Hell's realm took 9 days and 9 nights through landscapes that would give nightmares to nightmares. Hermóðr and Sleipnir galloped through valleys of shadow, over bridges guarded by the dead, and past creatures that existed only to torment souls. The most dangerous part was crossing the bridge Gjallarbru, guarded by a maiden named Modgud. She challenged every soul that tried to pass, but when she saw Hermóðr, she was puzzled. "You're not dead," she observed. "Your footsteps still shake the bridge like those of 5 living men. Why are you here?" When Hermóðr explained his mission, she let him pass. Even the guardians of death respected his desperate love for his brother. Finally, Hermóðr reached Hel's hall. The goddess herself was exactly as terrifying as the stories claimed. Half beautiful woman, half rotting corpse. But she listened to his plea with something that might have been sympathy. "So," Hel said, her voice like winter wind through empty halls, "the gods want their golden boy back. That's interesting." Hel studied Hermóðr for a long moment. The goddess of death rarely had visitors, especially ones asking for resurrections. But Baldur's case was special. He had died before his time, killed by trickery rather than fate. "I'll make you a deal," she finally said. "If everything in all the realms, every person, every animal, every plant, every stone, weeps for Baldr, I'll release him. But if even one thing refuses to shed tears, he stays with me forever." It seemed impossible. How could anyone get literally everything in existence to cry? But Hermóðr had come too far to give up now. He agreed to the terms. As a show of good faith, Hel allowed Hermóðr to see Baldr one more time. The dead god sat in the place of honor in Hel's hall, still radiant even in death. He gave Hermóðr gifts to take back to the living world, tokens of love for his family and friends. The reunion was heartbreaking. Baldr looked exactly the same, but there was a sadness in his eyes that hadn't been there in life. He knew the terms of Hel's bargain, and he wasn't optimistic about the outcome. "Tell my family I love them," Baldr said, "and tell them not to blame Höðr. He was as much a victim as I was." Even in death, the god of light showed nothing but forgiveness and love. Hermóðr raced back to Asgard with Hel's terms. When he announced the bargain, the gods immediately sprang into action. They scattered across all 9 realms, pleading with everything they met to weep for Baldr. And it worked. Everywhere they went, tears flowed freely. People wept for the loss of such a perfect god. Animals mourned his gentle presence. Even stones and metals shed tears, or what passed for tears in the mineral kingdom. The response was overwhelming. Baldr had been so universally loved that the entire cosmos seemed eager to cry for him. Rivers of tears flowed from every corner of existence. Victory seemed within reach. But then the gods encountered something unexpected. In a cave, they found a giantess named Thuk. When they asked her to weep for Baldr, she gave them a response that chilled their hearts. "Let Hel keep what she has," Thuk said coldly. "Baldr gave me nothing in life, so I'll give him nothing in death. Let him stay where he is." The gods pleaded with Thuk. They explained how close they were to bringing Baldr back. Just one tear from her would complete the bargain, but the giantess refused to budge. "I never loved him," she said with a shrug. "Why should I pretend to mourn him now?" Her words were like ice water on the gods' hopes. But here's the kicker. Many scholars believe that Thuk wasn't really a giantess at all. The name means thanks in Old Norse, but it was often used sarcastically. The suspicious timing, the convenient location, the stubborn refusal to help, it all pointed to one conclusion. Thuk was almost certainly Loki in disguise. The trickster had orchestrated Baldr's death, and now he was making sure the god stayed dead. It was the perfect crime. Killing someone and then preventing their resurrection while maintaining complete deniability. The gods suspected this, but they couldn't prove it. And even if they could, it was too late. Hel's bargain was clear. Everything had to weep or Baldr stayed dead. With one holdout, the deal was off. Hermóðr had to make the terrible journey back to Hel's realm to admit failure. The goddess of death wasn't surprised. "I thought as much," she said. "Your brother will remain my honored guest. Forever." After Baldr's funeral, the most magnificent send-off in Norse mythology, complete with a ship burned on a massive pyre, the gods turned their attention to finding justice. They couldn't bring Baldr back, but they could make sure his killer paid the price. It didn't take long to figure out who was really responsible. Loki's whereabouts during the Weeping campaign had been suspiciously vague. Plus, the whole mistletoe scheme had his fingerprints all over it. Clever, cruel, and perfectly executed. When the gods came for him, Loki tried to escape. He transformed into a salmon and hid in a waterfall, but the gods caught him anyway. Their punishment was as creative as it was brutal. They bound Loki to 3 sharp rocks using the entrails of his own son. Yeah, different times indeed. Above his head, they placed a snake that would drip burning venom onto his face for eternity. Only his faithful wife, Sigyn, showed him mercy, catching the poison in a bowl. But when the bowl filled up and she had to empty it, the venom would hit Loki's face. His writhing in agony would shake the entire earth, which is how the Norse explained earthquakes. Even bound and tortured, Loki's suffering affected the whole world. So what does this tragic story actually mean? On the surface, it's about the death of innocence and the failure of even divine love to protect what matters most. But dig deeper and you'll find layers of meaning that still resonate today. Baldur's death represents the end of the golden age of the gods. His light had kept the darker forces at bay, but with his passing, the world became a little dimmer, a little more dangerous. This story is actually the beginning of Ragnarök, the end of the world in Norse mythology. The tale also explores themes that feel surprisingly modern. What happens when you try to protect someone from every possible danger? Frigg's overprotective love actually created the conditions for Baldur's death. Her one oversight became the weapon that destroyed everything she tried to preserve. And then there's Loki, the friend who becomes the enemy, the insider who knows exactly how to cause maximum damage. His betrayal hits harder because it comes from within the family. Every pantheon needs a trickster, but Loki shows us what happens when the trickster goes too far. Baldur's death changed everything in Norse mythology. The gods became more suspicious, more guarded, more willing to use violence to solve their problems. The binding of Loki was just the beginning. His eventual escape would trigger Ragnarök itself. But here's something beautiful about the Norse version of the end times. Baldur doesn't stay dead forever. After Ragnarök, when the old world burns and a new one is born, Baldur will return. He'll emerge from Hell's realm to help build a better world from the ashes of the old. This cycle of death and rebirth, of light conquered by darkness only to shine again, speaks to something deep in human experience. We all face losses that seem permanent, betrayals that feel unforgivable, and moments when the light goes out of our world. Baldur's story reminds us that even the most devastating endings can be new beginnings in disguise. Sometimes the most beloved must be lost before they can be truly found again. And that, in the end, might be the most powerful magic of all, the promise that no matter how dark things get, the light will always return, even if we have to wait until the next world to see it. The most beloved God died because of one small oversight, but his story lives on, reminding us that even in the darkest tales, hope never truly dies. It just waits for its moment to shine again.